with my story, how I got involved in this 40 years ago. I was 27, living in New York City, and I was diagnosed with lymphatic cancer. I had a large tumor, attached to my heart, my lungs, my main arteries. I had exploratory surgery. They felt it wasn't removable. They said there was no chemotherapy to destroy it, but they said it could slow it down. They put me on it for 2 months and took me off, saying it was actually destroying my immune system rather than the tumor. And then I had radiation. Usually when people get radiation, they get like 6 weeks, and I got 6 months. After 6 months, the tumor had shrunk from the size of a grapefruit to the size of like a walnut. And there was, they said there's nothing else they could do. And I said, well, because it's smaller, help yourself to just sit down. Because it's smaller, why can't you just take it out now? They said because of radiation, it would just fall apart. And it was in 1977. It wasn't like today with 100 different possibilities. I mean, this was Sloan Kettering, New York City. My doctor said there's nothing. And that was actually a terrifying moment and a magnificent moment. Because in that moment, I really woke up to the realization that if I wanted to be alive, I needed to find ways to heal myself. By the way, one little segue was when I had exploratory surgery, they accidentally severed the nerve to one of my vocal cords. So my voice is a little tricky at times. You're gonna have to bear with me on that. Okay, so that wake-up call. I was involved in meditation and yoga at that time. And I went home and I lit a candle and I asked for help. I called on ancestors, I called on spirit, I called on people that love and support me, I called on healers I knew and didn't know. And I asked for 3 things. I asked for guidance, I asked for support, and I asked for healing. And that was it. And the next day, I felt like a tsunami of support from every level and every direction started to enter into my life. Just phone calls. I mean, people didn't even realize necessarily exactly what was happening, but you just popped in my mind, and I wanted to share this with you and that with you. And I'd be walking on the street and have an idea about doing something. The car would pass with a license plate saying, "Go for it." I mean, it was magical. And one of the phone calls was from a woman who said, "I want to give you the name and number of a doctor who has an extraordinary reputation for healing people with cancer." So, I mean, I hadn't heard of anybody. I mean, this was before clinics in Mexico. So I called immediately, and he answered the phone. I had a long conversation with him. And afterwards, he said, "My secretary will call you back to make an appointment." And she never called back. So after a few days, I called back and left a message. Still no call back, and this went on for a month. And after a week, I realized he wasn't going to call me back. But it was the only card in my hand, and it was just, I was like a laser beam at this time. And I called and called and called, and finally he called back. He said, okay, I'll see you. And it wasn't until years later that I found out that he had been arrested 4 times for working with people with cancer with nutrition. I mean, this was crazy times. And so he saw me anyway. And he scribbled out a program, handed it to me. He said, "Do it perfectly." And I said, "Absolutely." And I went home, and I thought I ate reasonably healthy. And this program was nothing exotic. It was just a huge amount of food. I mean, basically, it was like the beginning of every meal. It was like, I want you to eat this many vegetables. And it was like, what? But you juice half of them and you blend the other half. Easy. And on top of that was like a pound of fruit and like a quarter pound of nuts, and for dinner, a pound of cooked vegetables and a pound of like yams or something like that. I mean, it was on one level extremely simple, but on another level, it was just a huge amount of food. And you just had to learn how to get in the rhythm, which wasn't difficult to make it. But eating it was another thing. I mean, breakfast, at this point, let me just say that I devoted my entire life to healing. I went on disability, I quit my job. I mean, I was so fortunate that I was in a situation where I could do this. And so breakfast got through, lunch got through, dinner. I'd get through half of dinner and be totally full. And there was like another pound and a half. The thought did not even enter my mind. Is this enough? It didn't even enter. It was like I wasn't going to sleep until this food was consumed. This is my medicine. So I would just sort of like take a nap and come back, and every night I went to sleep like a pregnant woman, totally bloated with a stomach ache and a hot water bottle, right? And I did it. And after about 3 weeks, something snapped, and my body became like a sponge. And I could slurp up the food just effortlessly. If I had friends that were having dinner with me that were eating similar, if they left food, I'd say, have that too. I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, there was no part of me that said, I'm full, I've had enough, I can't do it. I mean, that resistance did not exist. But what started happening was a little scary to me, which was that I started to become weak, and I started to drop weight. And I'm not somebody that had a lot of extra weight to drop. And other odd things started happening. I started coughing up mucus after a week that looked like it had little black strings in it. I started to have loose stools. I started to wake up in the morning and my eyes were stuck together with gook that I had to clean out. But the thing about getting weaker and losing weight was the scariest thing. And I knew that this doctor saw people on a monthly basis. So I called up, I said, could I see you after a month? He said, okay. So I came back and he said, how are you doing? And I was afraid to tell him how bad I thought I was doing. So I said, I'm fine, I'm okay with it, I'm doing the whole thing, everything's good. And he said, okay. He scribbles out another program, similar but a little different, very fine-tuning changes, interesting changes. I go home and the second month is worse. I'm down 10 pounds, and it's like, whoa, it was skinny. And when I climbed, I had a 2-story house. When I get to the second story, I have to sit on this top step and catch my breath. And I just would call him and say, this is what's happening. And actually I didn't call. I called him when there were things like, nausea or stuff like that. But I was afraid to tell him about the weakness because I was afraid he would say, you're dying, it's not working, So when I went back to see him the second month, he said, how are you doing? And actually, I just burst into tears. I couldn't hold it back. And I just told him what's going on, and he went, yes, it's working. And from that moment on, he just took me under his wings. And I was always fascinated with science, and I would just have 100 questions. And he was delighted to answer them. And it was interesting because I was involved in a group, kind of like a meditation group, and eventually everybody started seeing him because they started seeing results. And some people had this problem and that problem. So it was always fascinating to me. Why did you give that person that? And why did you, little did I know I was in training, right? But it was just fascinating. I learned what I could. And for the next 3 years, I started to understand that for a week or two, if I felt weak, if I had breakouts and rashes and itching and this and that, began to understand that this was part of the body's ability to cleanse. And let me tell you something about cancer, which is I just see it, almost every day in my practice. The idea with cancer, and not just cancer, we're talking about disease in general, is to kill the cancer or get rid of it, scoop it out with surgery or whatever. But if you don't change, if you don't clear the underlying cause of the cancer, why wouldn't it come back? And in many cases, it does. And not just with cancer, but with other things too. And before I really understood what was happening, I was just a witness to deeper and deeper and deeper levels of my body just going through flush and flush and flush and flush. And we weren't just dealing with what was the underlying cause of the cancer. We were dealing with the chemotherapy, we were dealing with the dead cells and the radiation. It had complexity. But I went through 3 years actually feeling better and better. And occasionally there'd be, as they say, a week or two where I'd be off, things would happen, and I'd call him. And I was still seeing him on a monthly basis, and it was like, things just seemed fine. I went back to see my doctor my regular doctor after 6 months. And after my x-ray and blood work, he came into the room and he said, you know, according to your blood work, you're my healthiest patient. He said, but the x-ray, he said, the x-ray is strange. I don't know what to make of it. He said, it's exactly the same. And he said, this is very odd because you had an extremely fast-growing malignancy. And he said, what are you doing? So I explained to him, and he shook his head like he didn't make the connection. He said, look, I don't understand, but I just encourage you to not stop. Just keep doing what you're doing. And at this point, also, I want to pause for a second, too. I don't feel like I would be here if it weren't for the nutrition part. But the nutrition part is not the only part of my healing. I did intensive visualizations. There were some quite magical giftings that occurred with the visualizations. I rested a lot. I got involved in some artwork that I felt was connected to the healing. My dreams seemed to indicate things. So it was like every level that I could, I was engaged. This was my life for this period of time. And what wasn't a part of it was put on a shelf. Hopefully to be invited back later. But at this point, it was just my focus was healing in every way that I knew possible. After about 3 years, I started to go through some strange symptoms. First, I started to cough up like golf ball sized globs of mucus. No cold, no chest infection, just this mucus. And then my eyes started to have sparks in front of them and act really kind of crazy. And within 2 weeks of this, I came down with an intense fever, 104, and strong pains in the area where I had cancer. Of course, this was panic time, right? At this point, I lived in Florida. Our whole group had moved to Florida. And even though my doctor was coming once a month, there was a doctor that was part of our group that wasn't alternative. And he was sort of keeping an eye on things too. So with his encouragement, I went and got another x-ray. I ruled out pneumonia or any other thing, and the x-ray was actually the same. Things hadn't changed. And there are no other tests that showed that there were problems. And my nutritional doctor said, this is the biggie. This is what we've been working for. It doesn't happen this way with everybody. Sometimes it's more subtle, but with you, just if you can just hang in there with it, he said, just stay in bed, just eat the food, and just keep checking in. So the pain, I had a chiropractor come, and that helped. But I figured out if I cut a tennis ball in half and lied where the pain was, it was like magical. It just numbed the nerve. And I was fine. I went through, I think, about 6 weeks of the runs. I started to have aches and pains in different areas of my body. My temperature did come down after about 2 weeks to about 102, and it stayed there. And my heartbeat was like 140 just all the time. I mean, this was kind of everybody around me was just, kind of holding their breath. So a month went by, and I lost 10 pounds, and the symptoms were still coming on strong. My doctor said, just keep it going. And then a second month went by, and I lost another 10 pounds. And so I'm at 100 at that point, and the symptoms are changing. I mean, from my hair to my ears it's like for about 5 days, I felt like I had severe arthritis. I'd be fine sitting down, but the second I go to move, it was like, oh my God. And then that passed, and then this would happen. Another month passed. I was down to 90, and the symptoms were letting up. And I could tell the people around me thought I was on my way out. I had a friend that came down to visit me. She walked in my room and looked at me and ran out crying. And this doctor that was on the ranch was freaked out that I was going to die on the ranch and he was going to get the drug. And he begged me to do antibiotics. Begged me. And he said, this is a one chance if it's an infection. You could clear, it could be a life or death thing. And so I decided to go ahead and do that. And I did 10 antibiotics. I did 10 days of very strong antibiotics. It changed nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. So I went on for a few more weeks. And he came and he said, I think you need to have your parents come down. And I knew that he just thought any day I'd be gone. And I suddenly, even though, and I have to say that I felt like I was covered by some kind of protection, because I was very even through all of this. I wasn't freaked out. There was sort of a reverie. There was just some kind of calm that was there. Trusted my doctor. But I saw that, maybe one could die of detoxification. Maybe the life force could just, you could be cleaning out, but at some point disappear. And I just got it. This could not continue to go on the way it was. And I just went inside, and with the most ferocity I could muster up, I literally said, enough. And within 3 days, my temperature started to become low. Within 6 days, I gained 5 pounds. And that started the process of beginning to gain weight and beginning to heal. That wasn't the end of the symptoms, because shortly into that, I started breaking out in symptoms from chemotherapy and radiation. And these weren't little guesses. When I had chemotherapy, I didn't lose my hair. I lost my hair color. So I was on it for 2 months. So 2 months of growth is about 1 inch, right? So for 1 inch of growth grew in lighter. It wasn't white, it was just lighter. And then when I was off the chemotherapy, it grew back. And so as it grew out, it was like I had this halo. Well, the same exact thing happened. My hair lost its color. I had sores in the exact same place. I had rashes in the exact same place. And with radiation, there was kind of this smell, and that started to just, I'd smell it around me. And my doctor said, this is it. This is it. I mean, this is the clearest example that he had seen of what's called retracing. When the body is not only clearing out, I was not only clearing out the underlying causes of disease, but also the underlying treatment for the disease too. And it was extraordinary. I mean, it was extraordinary to witness. And I started to regrow a new body. It was like my weight came back differently. My menstrual cycle had been irregular my whole life. From this point on, it was perfect. My skin had been breaking out. From that point on, it was perfect. My hair changed. I mean, it was really an extraordinary thing to experience. I mean, it was the deepest level of transformation. I didn't even know it was possible. I never met anybody that had gone through any of this. And really, if I didn't have the support of this doctor, and the woman also that was the head of our group was absolutely right there too. She felt, you will get through. It was amazing. It felt miraculous, but really, I mean, I've come to realize in many ways it's just basic common sense. I mean, our bodies, their main thing is survival. They want to survive. We are built to survive. Everything around us is organized to support that survival. And there's an intelligence in the body that understands where things are problems, what's going on. And my experience is that for the most part, that the body also understands how to deal with these things, how to clear them, how to heal, how to rebuild. But its capacity to do that depth of work and that potency of work doesn't happen for most people because the fuel and the power is not available. You know, the metaphor of somebody running from a bear who was able to run faster than was ever thought humanly possible, or jump higher than is thought humanly possible. What these bodies are capable of is beyond what most people think is possible on the level of healing. And it was my great, great fortune to have the guidance, the intelligence, the support to be able to experience that. And once I got well, and I ended up leaving this community, moving to California, people started to call me. They had heard about me from friends. A lot of them had cancer, but some of them had diabetes, and some had heart disease, and this and that. Can you help me? And my doctor was old, he retired, he passed away. He was so paranoid because of his arrest. He didn't write books, he didn't train people. And so I started giving helpful hints. I did have this background because it wasn't only my experience, but I was able to see the experience of all of these people, my community, who had different things. And so I started to share stuff, and I quickly realized I was going to get into big trouble. And I just sat with it, and it really, I've been an artist my whole life, but it really felt like passing this extraordinary wisdom on was really the work that I felt most drawn to do. And so I went back to school. I ended up getting my PhD. As life would have it, I ended up finding somebody to apprentice with who taught me about blood work. I put the pieces together with symptomology and blood work, and in 1 month the changes you could see in blood work from changing diet were, that's still a book on my list to write. I mean, I have a 100-point club. This is not about bragging. Just want to share the potential. A 100-point club are people that dropped 100 points in 1 month of cholesterol, changing their diet. I mean, these are people that were high to begin with. We're talking about the high 200s or 300s. If your cholesterol is already normal, it's not going to drop to abnormal. It's just going to, regulate. And so the blood work was an incredible gift to help me to engage people in their own healing process so that they could see in black and white the changes. And it was also a great gift that enabled me to interface with medical doctors because we could talk about blood work, we could talk about the changes and things like that. So, when people come to me, it's like the first thing we talk about is supporting the body's ability to clear the underlying causes. And sometimes the underlying causes are kind of obvious. If someone's been working around a lot of toxicity, or obviously if somebody's a diabetic and they're on, a lot of sugar, a lot of bread, things like that. But a lot of times we don't completely understand the causes. I mean, I didn't fully. I mean, as an artist, I work with toxic materials. I think that was a big part of it, but it's a combination of things. And some of it I think will always be a mystery. But my experience is that when the body is given the support, it knows what to do and what to cleanse and where to cleanse. And when we talk about healthy diets, a lot of times people don't understand this. They start eating healthy and they may not feel well. They may have loose stools or be constipated, have a lot of gas, be more tired. They don't understand that the body doesn't like to build on shaky ground. First, it wants to clear before it rebuilds. So I try to encourage people, if you're going to upgrade your diet, it's good to educate yourself or work with a practitioner that understands this and can support you with this process. It's very important. And the second thing is that as you're going through this process, different symptoms come up that need to be responded to in different ways. Rest is really important. I mean, we hear how exercise is like crucial, and I agree, but not all the time. There's nothing that's perfect all the time. There are times when the energy needs to be available for the body to use as it chooses to use it. And in those times, rest is crucial. There's a time where it's like, okay, go for it. But those times when somebody's in a deep healing process, and even in a process of a cold or a flu, I mean, I meet people who say, I didn't feel well, so I went out and I ran 3 miles and now I feel so much better. From my perspective, what they've done is they've completely suppressed the work that it was trying to do, and pulled it back to the surface of the body, and it kind of aborted something that may have been really important to clear. And most of the symptoms that people go through I see as remedial rather than disease symptoms. If you look closely at them, you'll see that most of these symptoms are the body's way to try to get rid of, to try to cleanse things. So I invite you, when you go through something next time, a symptom comes up, just spend a few moments thinking, how could this make sense in terms of carrying something out of the body? I mean, a cough is obvious. A cold, what happens? You're just getting rid of stuff. A flu, a fever. A fever can be brilliant. I mean, there are situations where somebody had a high fever and their cancer disappeared. The body's fascinating. It's mysterious. What is not mysterious is that if you give the body an enormous amount of fuel, it will use it to do the best work possible. And our idea of what an enormous amount of fuel is most people do not understand. I meet a lot of people that say, oh, I'm on a healthy diet. A lot of clients come in and say, I'm already on a healthy diet. And then we say, well, let's talk about what are you eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we can double the fuel, double the nutrient intake. And that is what gives the body that extra potency for the self-healing capacity to work at the highest, strongest, most capable level possible. And it's as simple as that, and it's as complicated as that. But really, from my perspective, it's simple. You know, health fads come and go every year, every month. Bone broth, kombucha tea, and this and that and the rest of it. But there's an underlying cause and effect foundation that has held true for me for 40 years and for clients for 40 years, which is a super high intake. And part of that intake is just plugging up the dam so you don't ingest things that will dilute that intensity. I'm not talking about an everyday person that's healthy that doesn't have problems, this level of intensity, but you should know it exists. It's possible when needed. And of course, to me, it would make basic common sense for everyone to say, hey, maybe a month a year, 2 months a year, I'm gonna give my body this opportunity to see if things need to come out, to place themselves in this kind of intensity. Thank you. I'm just saying that there's 2 minutes left. But, I feel like I pretty much said what I not only see to be true, but have experienced to be true with myself and with my clients. And it's not the same program for everybody, though there's some basics. Like you can try to eat as much food as your body is capable of eating and just reach a level where, hey, but then on top of that, if you added juice, you can take your nutrients to this whole other level. There are ways to amplify. There are ways to concentrate. And the work I do is sharing with people how to do that in a way that's simple and a way that really is powerful. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I welcome questions.
I have a question.